Diabetes Connections is brought to you by the only ultra-rapid-acting inhaled insulin, by Omnipod, simplify life with Omnipod 5, and by Dexcom, keeping you in control with an integrated system for diabetes management.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, I'm talking to a pediatrician whose daughter had already survived a cancer diagnosis when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. In fact, it was her mother, my guest, who knew enough to test for T1D, so mom and daughter found out together in the school bathroom. Dr. Maureen Michele says her family is now on the other side of what she calls overwhelming chaos, and what they've learned can help others. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am your host, Stacey Sims, and as always, I am so glad to have you here for another episode of Diabetes Connections. I think I'm sounding okay. A little bit of spring allergies. Here in the Carolinas, everything has been blooming since the very beginning of March. But as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I started taking allergy shots last summer, and man, do I wish I had started sooner. I am keeping my fingers crossed, but so far, I really feel like I'm so much better than I usually am. So a little scratchy throat, but doing okay, and hopefully I sound okay to you. So, many years ago when Benny was first diagnosed, and many of you probably went through this too, well-meaning friends said to me stuff like, at least it's not cancer, right? Boy, I hated that. Of course, I was grateful, right, that it was a chronic condition that he could live with. But diabetes is still really, really tough. There is no need to play some kind of comparison game of who has it worst. And that kind of well-meaning comment was the first thing that went through my mind when I started talking with this week's guest. She is the author of Reclaiming Life, a guide for parents of chronically ill children. And as you already heard, Dr. Maureen Michele, her family, and her daughter, Kylie, have been through a lot. First cancer, then diabetes. How do you get through something like that? What works? What can we learn from their experience? And Dr. Michele is also a pediatrician, so of course, I also asked her about that side of things. My kids are too old for the pediatrician now. But, what would she like parents of young children to know? So we're going to get to all of that in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. And I am amazed how hard these automated insulin delivery systems work. Omnipod 5 automatically increases, decreases, or pauses insulin delivery every 5 minutes. This technology is called Smart Adjust, and it's in the pod. So that means if you're out on the football field and the controller is in your bag, the pod and the Dexcom G6 continue to talk and make adjustments. That would have been awesome for us in middle school or when Benny was backstage at the school play. All of that, and you get the freedom of no tubes. Fill out the quick online form and see if you're eligible for a free trial. Click on the logo at diabetes-connections.com or visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections for full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions. Also, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Maureen, thank you so much for joining me. So many different topics to go through with you. I'm not quite sure where to start, but I will start with welcoming you to the show. Thanks for being here.
No, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here and be among friends who kind of know what life with diabetes is like.
Yeah, exactly. Before I jump in, how is everybody doing? You have 3 kids. We're here to talk about your daughter, but how's everybody doing now?
Great. I have 0 complaints. I have 3 beautiful children who have become amazing young adults. My oldest is now 24. Kylie, my daughter, who we're kind of chatting about, is 22 and has lived with type 1 diabetes for the last 10 years and is an MD PhD student now and is going to solve the world of autoimmune diseases. And then my youngest is a senior in high school and ready to launch onto his next journey.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm knocking wood. You can't hear me, but I'm doing that for you. I'd love to, make sure we cover the superstitious side of things.
Of course.
That sounds great, though. So let's talk about Kylie.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to talk about type 1 diabetes, but way before that diagnosis, you all had just a terrible scare, and you write the full story in the book. But can you share, she was so tiny. I don't want to ask, what is it like? It must be absolutely devastating to be a parent of a child, with a cancer diagnosis that young. But what stands out for you about that looking back?
One of the big things was when I went into medicine, I had this kind of belief that because I was a doctor taking care of kids, I was not going to have sick kids. Like it was kind of put me into this protective bubble. And when she was diagnosed with neuroblastoma, which is a type of cancer of the adrenal gland that sits right on top of the kidney, it rocked my world because it disrupted this belief that I had about not having a sick child. It was, as a mom, completely overwhelming to watch my 6-month-old daughter have to go through this medical journey that I had been on the medical side of with other patients in the past. So I knew what it was going to be like, and I didn't want to go there. Completely overwhelming experience. Through that, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about medicine. I learned a great deal about being a mom. And I kind of grew those lessons even more later when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. But it was an experience that I don't wish upon my worst enemy, but I am forever grateful for, because having gone through it, I can now look back and realize that that experience has made me such a better person. And thankfully, she has been cancer-free for many years now. And that was part of the reason for writing this book, was to help other parents who are kind of on this journey have it be a little bit easier for them than what I went through myself, being on the parent side of things.
How is this treated in such a tiny little baby? And how long was this? I mean, I guess it's always part of your life, right?
Right.
But how long did cancer treatments last for your baby?
Yeah. After the original diagnosis, which was determined to be neuroblastoma because she had some symptoms, some diarrhea, and a lump in her belly. She had a huge workup, went off to surgery, and had the tumor removed, which at the time of the surgery, they had found that lymph nodes were involved, which upped the stage of her cancer. So with the staging of what she had, it required chemotherapy, which meant more trips back to the operating room to get central lines placed, etc. So it was a several month process of lots of central lines, lots of inpatient admissions to the pediatric ward to get chemotherapy, lots of outpatient trips to the oncology clinic. And then following the chemotherapy part, it was a lot of follow-ups, more frequently initially, and then it got spaced out over the years. But thankfully, she does not remember that part of her life. And I say thankfully because I think the diagnosis of diabetes would have been a lot tougher had she remembered being poked and prodded when she didn't have the capability of saying that she didn't like it. And so her inability to express how she was feeling was actually quite a blessing to me because I knew what she was feeling, but we didn't have a choice. So it was actually helpful that she wasn't verbal at the time of all of this because I didn't have to deal with hearing a small child's words to tell me what I already knew.
She doesn't remember any of it.
No, but I joke with her that of my kids, she is the extrovert. And I think it was all from that experience, just because in my mind, when she was going through it and not having a voice, that when she started talking, like she wouldn't shut up. And that is the way she's kind of lived her life. So it is interesting to think and reflect and wonder like how the experience shaped her personality, and even though she doesn't remember it.
Yeah. It's so interesting with little kids like that. My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2 with type 1.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was devastating, like most diagnoses are. But with a little kid like that, you can't even explain to them. You can't reason with them and say, there's a reason why we're suddenly, all the people that love you are suddenly hurting you now or stabbing you. But he remembers none of it. And that was such a comfort to me at the time. I remember thinking, like, you just have to harden your heart right now because he's not going to remember this.
Right.
So, and thank goodness he does not.
Yep.
But your daughter remembers her diabetes diagnosis.
Right.
Let's fast forward to that. And what I find remarkable here, and I talk to healthcare providers who have kids with type 1, and this happens all the time, but I'm still stunned. You basically diagnosed her, right? Right back to her answering my question. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afrezza. Afrezza is the only FDA-approved mealtime insulin that comes in a powder you inhale through your lungs. So why should you consider this unique alternative to mealtime injections? Afrezza is another option if you want to lower your use of needles or if you're experiencing skin reactions at your injection sites. And it is ultra rapid acting, so you can take it right when your food arrives, even unexpectedly. Find out more, see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on Afrezza.com/safety. Now, back to Dr. Maureen Michele talking about how she diagnosed her own daughter.
I did.
Oh.
I did. And again, it was a situation where I thought being a doctor was going to put me in this bubble of not having a sick kid. And that kind of myth got busted when she was an infant and went through cancer and her cancer therapy. Well, I then thought, well, we've checked that box. My initial myth was busted, but now we're good. There's nothing else medically that's ever going to happen to her. So when she was 12, she was going to a school for the arts. She was a dancer. And she texted me from school saying, something's wrong with me. I've peed 12 times today. You need to bring something home to fix me. Oh. And I, of course, think, she just has a urinary tract infection, because we've already had that cancer card this can't be diabetes. Like, how can it be diabetes? Like, we can't be that unlucky. So I had brought a urine cup and a urine dipstick that I had taken from the pediatrics clinic. I took it to her school when I picked her up, knowing that, hey, I'm going to figure it out while we're here because it's closer to where I needed to go to get antibiotics to treat her urinary tract infection rather than driving all the way back home. And in this tiny school bathroom, I dip her urine and the dipstick like turns incredibly dark for the glucose like immediately. And I knew what that meant and started crying. And she and I are in this like little, small bathroom. And she looks at me in, the innocence of a 12-year-old, not having any clue as to what was the matter. And I said to her, "Look, Kylie, you have diabetes." And she said, "Well, am I going to die?" And I'm like, "No, sweetheart, like you're not going to die." And she's like, "Well, why are you crying?" And I said, "Well, because I don't want you to have diabetes." And then again, from my experience of doing pediatrics, I knew what type 1 diabetes meant. And I knew there was no cure. And I knew that in this tiny school bathroom, our world had just been rocked again. It was a very tough ride to the emergency room from the school, because then again, in the innocence of a naive child, she tells me that she doesn't want people rushing around when they're in when we're in the emergency room. And I said, "Well, nobody's going to be rushing around, but why is that a problem for you, Kylie?" And she says, "Well, because on television, every time somebody rushes around, that the patient dies, and I don't want to die, so don't let them rush around."
Oh my gosh.
And it was just I can remember that conversation like it was yesterday, because it gave me tremendous insight into the brain of a child and what their framework is causing them to worry about and fixate on. And it, again, has helped me practice medicine, because I was able to have that intimate perspective with Kylie to be able to understand that patients feel the same way.
I'm sure we'll talk more about your daughter, but with what you just said, I'd love to lean into that a little bit more and talk about how you do talk to your patients, because as a pediatrician, I've got to imagine that you have, since your daughter's diagnosis, maybe before, you've diagnosed other kids.
Yeah.
What is that like? I don't want to ask how do you do it, because I think if you're listening to this podcast, everybody knows how that is done, sort of.
Right.
But what's that like for you? How do you try to make it easier for them based on your experiences?
I will say, initially, when Kylie when she was an infant and went through neuroblastoma, and I returned to work following all of her treatment and surgeries, etc., that I was incredibly resentful. Resentful because I would see patients in clinic for colds and rashes, and I would think to myself, what? Oh, they don't even understand what I just went through. I feel very lucky that I was quickly able to catch myself doing that and change my mindset to realize that just like I was worried about my daughter when she got diagnosed with neuroblastoma, the parent that is coming to bring me their child who has a cold or a rash, they're worried about their child. And that's why they're coming to my office. And that perspective and putting myself into their shoes rather than being resentful was such an incredible help to make sure that I was still having joy in practicing medicine. And through the years, yes, absolutely, I've diagnosed kids with type 1 diabetes. And I think the experience with Kylie has made it so that I'm not going to say better, I do a good job of explaining what's going on and to make sure that they have the opportunity to ask questions and not feel like I'm talking above them, So it has really changed how I approach patients, how I approach families, not just in type 1 diabetes, but anything. Like, I am a firm believer that when you leave a physician's office, you should be able to tell your best friend what just happened in your physician's office. In fact, when a patient leaves my office, I have them do kind of a quick summary of what we just spoke about, because I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. And medicine should really be a shared decision-making process. And if somebody doesn't have the understanding of what's going on, how in the world can medicine be a shared decision-making? So my experience of being a parent has certainly helped with coming in with a different perspective to my patients and allowing my patients to really ask questions on what they need more knowledge about so that they're able to share with their best friend what we just spoke about.
Do you share with parents or with families that are a definitive type 1 diagnosis in your office that your daughter has it, that you've lived through this?
Yes, I do. I
think that would make a big difference.
Yeah, and for sure, it absolutely does. And I think a lot, I'm just like, when you asked me that question, like, I think I had like a quick movie in my head of all the kids with chronic illness that I've taken care of. And I would say the ones that I saw pretty frequently, I think a good majority of them know that my daughter's a type 1 diabetic, because that perspective of being a parent of a type 1 diabetic translates into taking care of any sort of chronic health issues with kids. I think it, especially with my patients with type 1 diabetes, that it does give them hope and it helps them feel heard. But I think all of my patients have kind of benefited from my parent perspective of things.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm thinking back to our amazing pediatricians. And my kids are with, adult doctors now, or I guess the young adult. What would you like parents to know in general? It doesn't have to be about diabetes, about seeing the pediatrician. Like, what could make your life easier, or, anything that parents should be thinking about that either, like behind, like, what makes you guys talk about us when we leave and like, oh, I can't stand that family? Or what are some good practices for patients?
I will tell you, for me, it is bringing a list of stuff that you want to talk about. And that sounds funny, and maybe some of the pediatricians that are listening to this are going to be like, what did she say?
But you like the list. The list is a good thing.
I love the list. And the reason I say that is that it goes back to what I was saying about making sure that having your questions answered, and my job as a physician is to teach you. And so I want to teach you about stuff that you care about. If you come with a list like, I'm worried about eating, what should the diet be like? I'm worried about exercise, what should exercise be like? That allows the visit to be very efficient, and also allows me to know that, all right, we covered everything. And it, in fact, saves time in the end, because then the parent isn't calling me to, I forgot this. Oh, I forgot this. We have it all covered during that visit. So lists I love.
Will you share anything you don't like? It's okay if not.
Oh, that I don't like. Ooh, I don't.
I'll share. Okay, here's my fear of what pediatricians do not like. I'm thinking about, my daughter is one of these really well-behaved kids. We'd give her a book. She'd sit, she'd wait. Because, you're waiting in that office for a while. You're hearing people crying or carrying on around you. And then my son would, and even at the endocrinologist, my son was only 2. He would hide under the table. He would run around the room as much as possible. He would want to look at all the cabinets. Like, he was impossible, very good natured, but impossible until he was about, I don't know, 8.
Yeah. I would tell you that does not bother me. And most pediatricians, it does not bother them.
Right.
I think parents think it bothers them. But to me, as a pediatrician, if a 2 or 3-year-old is screaming bloody murder and hiding under tables because they don't want me to examine them, that child is healthy enough to care. And they're crying and screaming, so I know their lungs are good to go. So that part doesn't bug me. I will say, I think the thing that bothers me is not telling me what their thoughts are on a plan and leaving the office and deciding, you know what, I'm not doing that. And coming back at the next visit and like, yeah, we didn't do that. Because again, I practice medicine not to be this ruler of what's going on in the patient's world. I'm there to like guide and educate and help. And I can't help if there's not a conversation about reluctance to a plan. And physicians do not have a problem with saying, you know what, I really don't like this. Is there another option? And maybe there's not. And so my job is to say, there's really not. These are the risks and the benefits to doing it. And sharing the knowledge and expertise, it's not me forcing a plan on somebody. And if one of your listeners like has a physician who gets upset by that, go get a second opinion, because that's not the way good medicine should be.
Before I let you go, let's circle back and talk about the book. This is such an interesting book because it's not just the story of diabetes or the story of the cancer fight. You really are trying to help people deal with emotions and kind of learn from these experiences. Can you talk a little bit about why you set up the book this way and why you wrote it?
So I have for years had the kind of burning desire in my heart to write a book about my experience with Kylie, because my kids, like I said, Kylie doesn't remember the neuroblastoma part. My kids have often asked about various stories that were in the book. Part of the reason why I wanted to write it was to put it down as kind of a historical reference for my kids and my kids' kids and etc. on what happened. But really, that idea of a book has evolved over the years because I have obviously put a lot of reflection into my time as a parent taking care of Kylie with neuroblastoma, and my time as a parent taking care of Kylie with diabetes, and then my time as a physician. And my mission is to help make people's lives better. I thought, you know what? Like, what better way to do that than to be able to like write a book that shares the stories of Kylie, share stories of my patients, and then teaches lessons about various topics so that people who are going through this journey have something to be able to read and think about and reflect on their own journey so that it's a little bit easier than what I went through. Because I can tell you, I didn't do it right. I hope that by having the book out there and the work that I do with coaching parents, that I hope that their lives are made a little bit easier.
Kylie, you said she's in school, she's becoming a physician. So, one of the questions I get from parents quite often is, will my kid go away and, will they leave home? Will they be independent? Sounds like she's doing all that and more.
Oh my gosh, she's such a nerd. I will say for the parents with younger type 1 diabetic kids that it is hard not to, and Kylie still calls me her diabetic helicopter mom, but it's hard not to be, right? And technology has kind of forced us to be. Her Dexcom still feeds into the app on my phone, but giving them some leeway and independence is so important, and trying to treat them like any other kid is so important for them to learn autonomy and independence and confidence. I didn't realize if I was doing it good or bad. I guess I did it okay because she has always wanted to be a doctor, graduated college in 3 years. During that 3-year time, went and studied abroad in France. And I tell you, that was very
I'm sure.
overwhelming at points of time when she needs diabetic supplies like shipped off to France. That was interesting. But just reinforcing the fact that she is doing a great job of taking care of herself. And I remind her of that all the time. And every year in September, when we celebrate her diaversary, that I always send her a message to let her know how proud I am of how she's doing with managing her sugars. And I think by doing that, it has helped her know that she can do this and she can be independent and go conquer the world.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. The book is Reclaiming Life, a guide for parents of chronically ill children. Maureen, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
No, Stacey, it has been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about the book and about Dr. Michele, you can find out more at diabetes-connections.com. Again, the book is Reclaiming Life, a guide for parents of chronically ill children, and it is available on Amazon and everywhere you get your books online. I got to admit, my kids are older than pediatrician age, but I was really glad to hear her talk about active and rambunctious kids being appreciated. Maybe that's too strong a word, but being okay at a pediatrician, because boy, Benny was just all over the place. And it was just really a couple of years ago where I took them each in their late teens for vaccines, or maybe it was middle school vaccines. Who even remembers? And they both, they're 3 years apart, but at that same age, I cannot do the pediatrician anymore. These designs on the wall, the furniture is like half Benny's size. We found them different doctors before they were out of high school, but I loved our pediatrician. Boy, we were so lucky. Okay, next, we're going to take a look at the calendar and what's coming up. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. Hey, if you're a veteran, first of all, thank you. And you should know the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitoring system is now available at Veteran Affairs pharmacies in the U.S. Qualified veterans with type 1 and type 2 diabetes may be covered. Picking your Dexcom supplies up at the pharmacy may save you a lot of time, too. Connect with your doctor for more information. Dexcom even has a discussion guide you can bring with you. Get the guide. Find out more about eligibility at dexcom.com/veterans. My calendar has changed a little bit, and I just want to talk to you about what's going on and hope I can see you at some of this stuff. Next week, I am traveling. It is Leah's last spring break of college, and we're going to go see some family in New York and do some fun stuff. So next week, we should be business as usual, show-wise, and I'll post on social media or send out an email if anything changes, but all good there. And Benny will be visiting some colleges. Yeah, he's got to make his decision. Maybe by the next time I'm talking to you, I'll have something to report. But he's going to go take a look at some schools. He's going to at least 2 proms. I don't know. In my day, it was different, but he's got friends at all these other local schools, so he's going to have a good time this spring. Then I am going to Ireland. I'm going to Ireland the first weekend in May for Thrive-A-Betes. And I just found out that the other keynote speaker, I'm doing the opening keynote and some workshops, is Nerd-A-Betic, friend of the show, Camille Armacki, who is just a great guy. We met in person almost 5 years ago. I think it was the fall of 2018 at a conference in California. So I'm excited to see him again. Then we've got Leah's graduation from college. I've got a podcasting conference in early June. I'm speaking at the She Podcasts Live conference. But then I think I'm going to go to ADA this year. I've never been to the ADA scientific sessions that happens in June. Just the family calendar never cooperated, but I think I can swing it this year. So of course, now that I'm looking at it, it's all the way on the West Coast. So maybe by the time I'm back next week, I will have made a decision and booked my tickets. But if you're going, definitely reach out. Let me know. I'd love to know some kind of the ins and outs. What's not to miss and when should I get there? Shoot me a line. And if you are a company with some cool stuff, I know this is such a big deal for everybody, unveiling studies, and we always do so many shows on it. Reach out. Maybe we can do something while I'm there. That'd be a lot of fun. Then, of course, it's Friends for Life in July. And boy, I can't wait. We are going to be announcing the next Mom's Night Out conferences, and that's going to happen in the fall. So yes, I said conferences, more than one, more than two. I can't wait to talk to you about this. The one in January here in Charlotte went so well. We had to plan a few more. So, much more to come on that. Thank you as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I will see you back here very soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.